Evening, everyone, and tonight we are joining the deposit disputes discussion on the Fife Landlord Show episode 1. And tonight we have guest host joining us, experienced landlord and investor Jim Parker. Evening, Jim.
Hiya, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Thank you. A nice wee setting. I'm enjoying could do a wee glass of wine and a beer or something like that. Just sit and relax and next to the bridges at the back of me.
And we've also got joining us tonight as letting agent Kerin and Marshall. Evening, Kerin.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
So a good topic tonight, which is deposit disputes, which I know, Kerin, you've had a lot of experience with over the years, so it should be a good topic to discuss tonight. All right. Yep. So, kicking off, ending up in disputes at the end of a tenancy is one of the least inviting prospects of being a landlord. And thankfully, most tenancies end perfectly amicably. But when they do end in disagreement, many landlords manage to lose their claims, leading them to feel that the system is weighing against them. Now, the most important thing in a deposit dispute is for the outcome to reflect reality, whether the fault is on the landlord or the tenant's side. And the courts and attribution services are not there to automatically find in favour of tenants, but it's the landlord's responsibility to prove a claim is valid and realistic. So I think, Kerin, that'll ring true to you, obviously, about valid and realistic claims. I think, obviously, you've spent quite a few years in property management, and you kind of fell into deposit disputes for a few years there. So I know you're quite experienced in it. So, yeah, valid and realistic claims. Kerin, do you have any feedback on?
Yeah, definitely. You have to be realistic with it. Obviously, you have to make sure you're allowing fair wear and tear on the properties, and obviously tenants have to be realistic and giving the property back as well in the condition that they got it in. Unfortunately, not all of them do. So obviously landlords need to guide you through the process just to make sure they've got the strongest claim for getting their property back in the condition that it was given to the tenants in.
Yeah, I think that's something that we always stress to landlords. And although condition reports and check-in reports are not mandatory, they are a big part of safeguarding yourself as a landlord against obviously any claims that you might need against the tenant at the end of the tenancy. Jim, obviously you've dealt with a lot of deposit claims and things over the years. Do you have any feedback on obviously valid and realistic claims and also inventories and condition reports?
It's quite, I tell you what, it's quite a minefield. When I first started in this, it was a case that you knew where you stood. It was obvious. There was no inventories of that. It was obvious when you walked into a property. It's like, well, I've done this, I've done that, I've decorated, I've carpeted, and all the rest of it. So by the time the tenant walked out, it's like, well, I put new carpets in when you got it, and I've got the receipt for that, and I decorated it when you got it, and I've got the job for that. But now, there's now a more stringent requirement in it, because it's almost like it's similar to just going to a court of law. Yeah. You're sitting in front of people who are either ex-judges or ex-legal people or currently legal people, and mentors, advocates, or whatever it is. Yeah. And they're deciding, by the letter of the law, literally. So if you're not really covered by things like inventories and that, done by an independent inspector. There's even a requirement to do that now, because even if you do it yourself and they sign it, they're even doubting that, and that's bizarre.
The introduction of the deposit schemes has been quite good. Obviously it's been a long journey. I think we've even had them in and spoke to us and showed us what exactly they're looking for in inventories, even just down to the terminology, whether you're describing something as professionally cleaned or clean to a domestic standard or something's brand new as well. You need to be quite clear in that. And I think the process has changed slightly. They used to quite happily accept inventories that were done by obviously us ourselves or landlords by themselves, but I think that they more lean towards a third party independent inventory clerk doing that. And they're worth their weight in gold at the end of a tenancy if you're going to be claiming on the deposit.
It's going to be quite difficult for a self-managed landlord now. And the ones that have got tenants for a long time, woe betide you when they eventually move out, because I've got a funny feeling you ain't getting your deposit back regardless. You're not getting it. Even though you've got grounds to get it, you'll probably not get it, because they're even turning around and saying, well, you've been in for 5 years, so I tell you what, the carpet should be done by now. So you don't, even though they've burnt the carpet or destroyed the carpet, it's like, well, it should only last 5 years anyway, so return the deposit back to them. Really?
Yeah,
like
I think that 5-10 year tenancies, you really need to accept the fact that you're going to have to possibly do a good bit of overhaul to the property. Unless, I mean, there are tenants that keep their place pristine, but the majority, you will have to go in and, like you say, carpets, redecor and things.
Well, I hate to admit it because people go, ooh, it's like, I've had my carpets for 15 years. And there's nothing wrong with them. I give them a quick clean. So it's like, you know, to turn around and say, well, I think a carpet should only last 5 years is a bit, it's a bit daft.
There's always open for discussion what is wear and tear and what length of time wear and tear can occur in. And yeah, so there's a lot of questions. And I think that the adjudicators on the deposit schemes, it's their job to try and do that unbiasedly. Obviously, they will be because they don't know the tenant or the agent or landlord who's making the claim. But yeah, so it's a tricky process, and I think that it's good. I mean, obviously, we've done a lot of training on it. Kerin, you've obviously done it for a good few years now, and it's good to have an agent in place, kind of leading the way with you on that, because a lot of landlords could get lost in what they actually need to do and providing the correct evidence to win their claim, if they quite rightly should do it anyway. So
definitely, especially because we've gone through training for it. We've had like Safe Deposit Scotland coming in and go through what it is that they're looking for, and even just through it, obviously been doing it for a few years now, so you see it changing from like when I started doing them to now. There's such a change in that period of time, so you need somebody that knows what they're doing and knows what kind of evidence you're looking for. And again, we've got a better idea of what can account for wear and tear and where your strengths are going to be if you're looking to make a claim against the deposit.
Yeah, probably because we've made all the mistakes in the beginning and we're now more experienced in it. I mean, you know, we're talking about when deposit scheme first set up, but well, let's be honest, there was a lot of mistakes, but we never knew that because it wasn't really mistakes. It's literally, like I was saying, it's become so draconian. You kind of think, well, surely you don't have to do that. No, you've got to do that. And that's why they offered to come in and do that training with us for that reason. So, you know, okay, come in, we'll make sure we get it right every time. So we need the training to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think obviously inventories and things again brings us to set up an admin. And whenever a property requires an act for things to go right, you can guarantee they will come back as bad news. One culprit here is condensation and mould in properties. And if your bathroom or kitchen are susceptible to either, the most effective option is to install an extractor fan with a humidity sensor that automatically activates. Now, we've done that in properties in the past. And this one small job could remove all the possible consequences and costs and kerfuffle. Otherwise, you'll need to highlight potential mould and condensation issues to the tenant and get the tenant to accept any future costs that arise if they forget to do things like don't ventilate the property correctly and not opening windows. Now, that's a big one. And I think, obviously, we've come across it a lot, and I think a lot of landlords will have done as well. And terms like that could lead to some people questioning whether their property is somewhere that they want to live. If you're going to come to them and say, oh, look, there's a problem here with mould and possibly condensation, you need to keep the windows open and things like that as well. So there's a lot of different interpretations there. But I think in bathrooms and kitchens, if it's an issue, get an extractor fan in there, and if it's used properly, it should resolve the issue. I mean, that's a big one, Kerin, yeah?
Yeah, even just a good mould spray. The amount of tenants that we've had that have been like, I've got mould, and you go out and we check it, and obviously, again, so many years of experience of dealing with it, you just know now, I'm like, that's condensation. But the amount of them that won't accept that, and I'm like, it happens, this is how you deal with it. And it just, if people, like you say, you've got an extractor fan or a good mould spray, then it takes away the issue for it. And it's so easily fixed, providing you follow the right steps for it. But you have to make sure your tenants are willing to actually take those steps to do it, because unfortunately some of them don't.
I think the biggest challenge is, you know, a lot of, best will in the world, a lot of people that are in tenancies speak to their other friends and they all have an opinion. And as soon as they hear the word mould, everybody immediately assumes rising damp and it's the worst. And spores are going to get in and kill me during the night. And it's going to, you know, all these things. And it's like, and generally, If it's just black, if it's black on the wall and it's not really furry or anything like that, that's just normal condensation damp. That's just poor ventilation. Now, the key here is, though, and the reason this is caused now, because everybody says, oh, it's all, how's it all coming up now and how's all this damp problem? Because we're sealing every single house. We're putting double glazing in every single window. We're sealing up every single door. We're insulating every single wall. We're we're putting draft excluders on the hatches to the attic. We've got nowhere for any air to flow through a property anymore. And that's what's causing the major issue. So as soon as you start cooking and your pot starts steaming, or your kettle starts steaming, the water doesn't go anywhere except straight for the coldest place in the house, and it's the outside walls. So it hits an outside wall because it's the coldest wall in the house. If you have something against that wall closely to it, in other words, a gap like that, then when it gets down the back of there and it sits on the wall and condensates, but it actually doesn't dry out. And that's what causes the black spot. And everybody thinks that that's rising damp, but it's not. It's just poor ventilation, because you're not opening a window. You're not letting the air flow through the house. You're not putting ventilation in. So it's the irony is, we spend all that money to seal the house up, and then we spend all that money to get drafts back in through extractors. And
I know you've got all these airtight double glaze, triple glaze units, even, and draft excluders things, trying to get your house warmer and your energy efficiency rating up, and then obviously because you're not obviously allowing that out, like you say, then it's going to cause condensation.
Your humidifier van's running all day long.
Cost you a fortune.
And then people have a shower, and you've got to admit, when showers were first installed in houses, no one expected to put fans in, because they always expected to open my window, sorry. So they always expected just to leave the window open or something like that. And they had drafts coming through the house anyway, so no one really bothered. But because all that's been sealed up now, this is what's causing the problem around the house, because when you have a shower, there's nowhere for the condensation to go anymore. The same thing, but it's even worse, because some people's showers are like steam rooms. And then they open the bathroom door and it goes whoosh straight out. They don't see it going straight out, but it does. And then it travels to the first place in the house, which is the coldest wall. And that's how it gets it. And even at the top, if you look in your shower as well, you usually see it condensating in the corner of the windows and stuff like that. But that black is not rising damp. It's not leaking from your gutters or your roof or anything like that. That is literally just poor ventilation. And it does need to put a fan in, which again is another cost.
The thing as well, in 2- and 3-bedroom houses, I mean, you could have anything like 3-4 adults all showering at one time at the back of each other, and that could really cause an issue. And we've seen it happen in properties before.
But it's equally the same when you go to your bed. When you're sleeping at night, you give about 20% of condensation in the air just by breathing. And that goes in. So if you've got all your windows sealed up, and then you open your curtains in the morning, all the condensation's on the window and it's running down the window, everybody goes, oh, the house must be damp. It's because you've sealed the whole place up. And it's got somewhere to go, and it just goes to the coldest part of the house.
And that brings us another example of poor setup is when you're renting to people with pets. Now, which is usually problem free, but it does require written agreement over any costs that may arise. So, Kerin, we've started to implement, I think other agents as well, as pet deposits and things as well. So people that have got pets in the first instance are now obviously paying extra deposits, and obviously it says here about the responsibilities to stipulate from the outset for any damages, smells and infestations, and we do get agreement of obviously professional carpets cleaning to be done at the end and things as well. And that's something that's not fairly new, but I mean, it is kind of new in the grand scheme of things. People paying pet deposits.
Is the pets deposit brought in with the normal deposit legislation? So in other words, I think it's only 2 months you can charge at the very most for deposit.
Yeah, you could only still maximum up to 2 months equal to the 2 months rent.
So when you take a pet deposit, that's part of that then?
Yeah, that is part of that.
Yeah, so it's just part of the normal deposit, but we'd usually base it around about like the size of the property. So if you've got like a 1-bedroom flat, we wouldn't take like a £300 pet deposit for it, because there's not as much space for potential damage for it. So it's obviously judged individually on the property and what kind of pet that they've got as well. I mean, if somebody's got a goldfish, still their pet. for that.
Yeah, I think typically
it's amazing when you think about it. There is points where you actually say there, and we laugh at somebody says they're a goldfish or a pet, but that brings me back to the adverts where people say no pets, and you actually get people not actually phoning you up because you've actually said no pets and they've got a goldfish or a guinea pig. And yet that
I actually had a guinea pig for no pets one this week, so it's like, does it count? Does it not count? So we just have to check with the landlords and see what they're happy with.
But yeah, generally we find about £200-300 extra deposit to cover pet damage. I think the most we've probably done, Kerin, maybe we've done about £400, depending. Like you say, it's depending on the property and the size and what it would cost to maybe like clean the carpets and things to kind of justify that.
It just gives that extra wee bit of security as well for the landlord, just in case, obviously, and it means somebody can have the pet in the property. Because the amount of people that are like, oh, I could get rid of my pet if I have to. I'm like, oh, you shouldn't have to. You just have to pay a bit of a bigger deposit, just so we've got a bit more security for it.
It's a good telltale sign for a tenant to actually put their money where their mouth is if they believe that their pet is responsible anyway.
Yeah,
it's when the alarm bell probably rings is when people actually say, no, I'm not paying extra for my pet. And it's like, well, why would you not if you knew it wouldn't damage anything? You know what I mean? So that it would be a way. You would probably ask another question after that, wouldn't we? We'd probably well, why wouldn't you want to do that if you can afford it? Because then that tells me straight away that there's a possibility that the pet might actually end up damaging the house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that brings one that says you'll find most tenants are quite happy to sign a clause accepting responsibility for any costs arising to pets or any visiting ones. So and we do find that most pet owners who are serious about obviously looking after their pets and keeping them well in the property will happily pay extra money to back that up. So and that brings us on to fittings and repairs, and there are plenty of landlord groups and social media where you'll see posts that celebrate how cheaply someone has managed to renovate on their rental properties. Often they find good looking but ultimately poor quality fittings, and they are not likely to last, and where a later visit from a contractor sends the price above the cost or buying something better in the first place. Now, we have seen that quite a lot, where we've had obviously we've tried and tested a lot of contractors over the past decade, Jim, and obviously we, like you say in previous shows,
we've tried and tested them over the last 30 years.
Well, I'm saying in my last 10 years.
So I tell you what, maybe some of them are still with us. Possibly.
Yeah, I think that, there's contractors for when I started, and that's over 10 years ago, that we still use. So yeah, and I think it's all about tried and tested contractors that are reliable, that use good, obviously good quality materials, and that they've got good, obviously, craftsmanship and things as well. And I think a lot of maybe new landlords or investors who are investing in the area that aren't from here will get caught out by contractors that aren't very forthcoming with their work, and obviously maybe not up to standard, which is a shame because it's a costly mistake. So again, if you are that person, speak to an agent or a property management team that are experienced in the area that know good contractors. That's definitely a plus point. I mean, Kerin, you've dealt with quite a lot of contractors over the last few years, and Jim, we do still have some on the books that have been there a long time. And I mean, cheap taps or laminate floorings in wet areas are a couple of quick tricks in making a kitchen or a bathroom shine on the surface, but your property must be durable as well. It's tough to prove a tenant is at fault when the fittings and materials in a property simply aren't up to the job. And that's very true. And I think, and you see, I see laminate flooring getting put in bathrooms and things, and that's just a no-no. I mean, in any property, but I think the word durable there is quite the prominent word. Things need to stand the test of time in properties that have got tenants in them. And regardless of who the tenant is, people need to be able to live in a property, and things like cheap fittings and fixtures, and I think also like the laminate flooring in the bathroom things, just never going to stand the test of time, and it's up to the landlord to replace that because they were never up to scratch in the first place.
How would you be able to argue your position though? I mean, how would that go against you in a deposit dispute? Because could they prove in the first place it was cheap, or is it just
that's the point.
The fact that they just take their word for it?
Yeah, well, that's the point. It's so hard to prove that that obviously it was, whether it was a good quality, do you know what I mean, it was good, or it was a lesser quality, and it's the tenant's fault that because they're the way they're using it. So if you've got a tap that's broken, or that's obviously, or something, for instance, then it's hard to prove that it was the tenant that broke it.
Do you think is it more like almost like the landlord's guilty until they prove innocent? Another, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, the landlord, if the tenant turns around and says, "Oh, that was cheap laminate floor," it's up to the landlord then to prove that it wasn't.
Yeah.
Is that so? It's basically the way. Yeah, it's basic. Yeah, it is basically the way they look at it. Like the landlord has to prove basically that they're not at fault. So it comes back to the importance of like an inventory. You have to have something in place that basically says this is what it was like, and the key is to have an inventory done just before the tenants move in. So obviously the ones that we get, our photos are all dated and time stamped as well, so it backs up this was done just before they moved in. This is the condition it was given it to them. So obviously it backs up the case of basically, the landlord has to prove that they're not at fault.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I remember at one point, Kerin, when we first started doing the deposit scheme, and at one point we'd done a claim and there wasn't an inventory in place, and we actually they let us use the listing pictures, and which was a good few years ago now, because they would never do that now, because obviously there's the time frame in between listing the property and letting it, which obviously is up for questions. So there was a lot of things that took time to kind of obviously be looked at and reviewed as the safe deposit scheme, or I say safe deposit scheme.
Is it fair to say in the beginning they probably had a light touch approach to it? In
Yeah,
other words,
you
just wanted to see how it was, and then almost like suck it and see, and then start to say, okay, we're going to be more draconian here, we're going to be more stringent here, and then all of a sudden it's almost like it's completely belts and braces.
Yeah,
because before even we were able to submit like inventories. If the tenant hadn't been in for too long, we would be able to reuse the inventories. But now we can't do that at all. Like the inventory has to be done, they advise at least a week before the tenants move into the property, if not like the day or two before they move in.
So how long between tenancies would you need to then say, I've got to have another one done? You know, if somebody moved in and 6 months later they moved back out, could you get away with using your existing one with a couple of adaptations, or would you have to do it all again?
Tenancy, you need a new inventory now.
We used to be able to do that and have it just amended, but no, they won't accept it now, because the
original probably the key in the beginning is to make sure you have a longer term tenant. And so that cost is then absorbed over a longer period of time. Because I mean, if you had tenants going 6 months in, 6 months out, 6 months in, 6 months out,
and you're like 100 quid each time for an inventory.
You know, that soon racks up over a period of time.
Yeah.
And to me, if you've got a long-term tenant, then that money could essentially go to new carpets. It could go to eventually a new bathroom, new boiler.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's no wasted on that. So that's the type of thing I think. All that money utilized.
I think
no reason at all.
I think the key always is, and I've referred to it a few times, it's all about doing your due diligence in the first place about who the tenant is and whether they're right for the property, not just for a monetary aspect, but obviously who they are and their background. And there's a lot of aspects into the reference process to put in the right person in the right property. And obviously, and if you do put the right person in and they're happy, the landlord's happy, and I think we're going to come to inspections in a minute, which is a big thing about keeping obviously the property good and keeping tenants happy as well. You get longer tenancies, less void periods, so it all goes hand in hand. Doing all your due diligence in the first instance. But I do obviously like you say with regards to the deposit scheme, and it was a bit like suck it and see to start with for a long time until it got, and it is quite a good system now if you put everything in place correctly to begin with. I think if you've got all the right evidence and you've followed everything that you're supposed to do, then if you need to make a claim, and it's a fair and justified claim, you will see your deposit returned to whatever value you've requested if they feel it's justified. So and just at the end of that, the same goes for repairs. If you respond quickly and attend to repairs, you'll show respect for your investment, your tenants, and your time. And by making the property low maintenance home, you'll have longer, happier tenancies and fewer repairs and disputes. So just obviously what we're talking about there. And moving on to breaking the rules, and every now and then a property gets handed back in a condition where lots of work is needed to put things right. Jim's laughing.
It's not that. It's like, it's spotless, and you walk in and go, it's a blooming bomb site. It's like, how on earth do you think this is spotless? It's
another week. Oh, it's being cleaned. I'm like,
there's dirt everywhere. There's fingerprints on the walls, and it's like, what's wrong with that? And it's that is unclean.
and it's different individuals' perception of what's acceptable as well. And I think obviously, like you say, it depends on length of tenancy. Like if you've got somebody moving it after 10, even 15 years, you're going to have obviously a lot of things like the fingerprints on walls and things as well. Here's James saying, evening James.
Evening James, how are you?
So yeah, and yeah, you need to be realistic in that expectation. But it does, obviously, you may feel rightly frustrated, disappointed, or let down. But it's essential to keep your cool head, whatever you do. And no matter how tempting, don't hold on to the security deposit in a way that ignores legal procedures, or you risk invalidating your claim. So if you're going to put a claim through, Kerin, and we've seen obviously this happen in the past, where you're going to request back money to claim for something that's really unjust, then they're just not going to entertain it. I think you really need to be quite careful with that, Kerin, now.
Yeah, definitely. You have to be realistic. As I said, you have to be able to allow for wear and tear on the property within reason.
Yeah. But
yeah, if you're going to put in a claim that's for every single minor thing, that they're not going to look at it, you're not going to end up winning. Yeah. So you definitely need to put forward a claim that's fair to the tenant, and obviously that justifies what's actually needing done in the property.
And it is difficult to swallow as a landlord, because the reality is, well, wait a minute, I gave you the house brand new. Yeah. And so how should you be returning it to me anything other than brand new? You know, but there is that thing about the grey area called wear and tear.
Yeah.
And that's where we come back to saying, they say a carpet should last 5 years. And I'm like, no, a carpet should last 10 years. And, you know, you should be looking after it. You shouldn't be mistreating anything.
There's Heather saying, been there. I think we've all had to deal with that, Heather.
I've heard Heather's woes sometimes.
So yeah, your best course of action is to obtain quotes as quickly as possible for all the works and costs, then submit them to the previous tenant along with any reports and photographic evidence, which would be your sign-out report along with your inventory, and obviously submit that to your deposit scheme, and with clear and comprehensive details about what they are responsible for, and that's obviously your sign-out report. You don't need to wait until you have settled your dispute to carry out any repairs, so your next tenancy needn't be delayed beyond the completion of works. Now, you need to watch with that. Obviously, you need to go in and do your sign-out report, do all your checks, and get all the quotes done, and before you start to obviously go down that route. James is saying here, good, thanks. Got my nose buried deep in health and safety security. Arla, all right.
Arla Property Mark.
Yeah, enjoy that.
Good luck.
Yeah. So yeah, and of course it's a hassle, and you may not even want to speak to the people you have left the property in such a state. Obviously, you do that through the property deposit scheme now. One of the benefits of having a managing agent to deal with it on your behalf. Obviously, we do all that on behalf of landlords that we manage for. So, and I think a lot of this article is aimed at self-managing landlords and how difficult it can be if you don't obviously know all the ins and outs of making a deposit dispute claim. Still, clear communication without resorting to angry recriminations is the most likely route to a swifter settlement. And you do need to keep your cool when dealing with a deposit dispute, because it can get a wee bit out of hand.
How do we
James saying snowflakes?
How do we sit in terms of? How do we sit in terms of? I know about they're saying now that you can just go ahead and get the repairs, but what, you know, is there a reasonable time that you've got to let the tenant do the repairs, or do you should you prime them in advance before the tenancy ends to say this has to all be done before you actually leave?
Kerin, you're going to answer this because I
Yeah.
can see you eagerly doing that.
Yeah, so there's obviously a process that you have to follow. It's quite a lengthy one if your tenant disputes this, basically. So the first instance is once your tenant has moved out and you have back possession of the property, get your sign out report done. Make sure you've got pictures and your report to back up the condition of the property, and then you can put forward for your claim. So obviously if the tenants are going to dispute the claim for it, you need evidence to back up what you're claiming for. So you have to get obviously quotes. You can start doing the work, but you have to speak to the tenants first. You have to give them a chance to say to them, look, this is what's still needing done in the property, and give you a chance to go back so you can get your deposit back. But this is what's needing done. Obviously, if they say no, you can go for their deposit basically for what's necessary. But obviously you do have to give them a chance. And when obviously going through Safe Deposit Scotland, there is a section that they do ask, what steps have you taken with the tenant to resolve this?
Mm-hmm.
And if you say nothing, they're going to see that. So you're better off just saying to the tenants, look, I've been out, you've not done this. Do you want a chance to go back and fix it? And I mean, quite often we've had a few tenants, like we had one, she'd been in the property for years, she'd moved out and she hadn't done a good job. But I spoke to her on the phone and I was like, look, this is needing done. I know you want your deposit back. And she came and got the keys the next day. She was out, she got the paint all sorted, and we had the keys back and she got her deposit back. So it is important to obviously keep your tenants in mind and give them that chance to go back and rectify it.
My biggest challenge was when you used to give them that chance, then it was like you would wait for a week would pass, then another week would pass, and it's like, are you going to come back and do this at some point? Because I'm losing rent every single week, and for the few £100 I'm actually trying to get you to resolve this, I would be as well just writing it off and getting the property rented again, or doing it myself. And then
I think giving them a reasonable time scale to do it is an important thing. Just saying to them, this is how long you've got to do it. And if they don't, then obviously at least you can then put in that you have given them that chance to do it.
But then that's when it comes back to me saying that, you know, surely they should be told. I know you do this, but I'm playing devil's advocate for the people watching. Surely they should be told prior to moving out that this is what they've got to do.
Well, our tenants get an end checklist. As soon as they hand in their notice, we send out an end checklist that says, obviously, this is your vacating date, this is the steps to take for us getting the property back, and this is what you should do to return the property and what condition it should be returned in. But the key is they should be given the property back in the condition that they got it in. So if you've given them something, obviously, that's not been that fresh, don't expect to get it back any better than you gave it to them. I mean, some of them will have it all done up nicely, but you can't expect to get back.
Returned in pristine condition better than what they started with.
Yeah.
That brings us up next, and it does highlight that in the next bit. James, we did know you were speaking about the book when you said Snorefest and everything else.
I take offence to that. And a gate.
I mean, Kerin, we do get a lot of tenants that come back, and I mean, it's so easy to resolve it that way. Like you see, obviously, I know which tenants you're talking about that want to come back and done the painting, looked fine, good, and we've had other ones like that. And it's good to resolve things amicably like that. But I mean, cleaning conflicts, the largest area of dispute between landlords and tenants is cleaning, accounting for around 25% of all claims. In a way, it's comforting. Cleaning is not about breakages, repairs, or arguments over wear and tear. So it's effectively a small dispute. Regardless to who wins, it's straightforward enough to get a properly cleaned, but a waste of everyone's time for such a mundane thing. Of course, if it can be more of a trivial issue if your incoming tenants have to move into an unclean home, and that's what we're just speaking about there. So if you've got a tenancy that's been left unclean and you've had a time delay and things, and then the property has not been put back to a clean state, and then you try and bust a new tenant in, it's going to cause a knock-on effect. And it's not a great start to a tenancy, and a professional clean is more difficult to obtain while there are boxes everywhere and your tenants are there unpacking. So that's one to really avoid, because that could just cause problems for a whole new tenancy.
I think regardless if you lose the dispute about who's responsible for cleaning, I think you should just go and make sure it's all cleaned anyway, regardless, because what are you teaching the incoming person? You know, that's acceptable. If you're handing that to them, then how are they going to expect? It's like, well, if they do any damage, it's like, well, you gave me the house like this anyway, so why? He'll probably not be bothered. But the reality is, you know, most landlords are.
Yeah, and that brings us to, obviously, generally speaking, a dispute over cleaning comes up when one side skimps. Suppose you don't hand your property over in a professionally clean state and you don't employ an inventory clerk to take photographic evidence. In that case, any claim will be difficult to win at the end. And the same goes for outgoing tenants. If they sign off on the cleaning when they're moving in, but can't produce a receipt of professional cleaning when they leave, then they are unlikely to win a dispute. And that kind of covers what we're talking about there with regards to having the place clean and ready at the end, and then the tenant doing the same in return at the beginning, and the tenant doing the same at the end when they leave. Doesn't always work out like that, but the majority of times it does. So would you agree with that, Kerin?
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, you want to give the tenants in a condition that you don't want to set your tenancy, you don't want to start your tenancy on a bad foot with them, with giving them a dirty property. No. So, and like you say, Jim, I totally agree. Obviously, if you're giving them a property that's not clean, you're not setting a good standard for them to expect to have the property kept like. So you want to give them a nice property, nice and clean, and they should give it back like that, hopefully.
Start as you mean to go on, basically.
Exactly.
If you start a tenancy like that, it's doomed for the outset, I think.
It has to be the biggest, between a landlord and a letting agent and a tenant, it has to be the biggest area of conflict. Because it really is down to a personal opinion, how, what cleanliness is. Because everybody has a different definition. Somebody's got, 4 kids and a dog. It's like, their level of cleanliness is probably going to be a bit different than somebody that's just on their own. Who just, is constantly cleaning their house top to bottom and is spotless every single day, because they don't need to spend all that time having to clean up at the back of their children. So it is a real bone of contention sometimes, and that's probably why I like landlord or investors rather than actually landlords, because landlords want to get hands on and they want to get involved in stuff, and it's like that's when it comes an issue, because you should really just be hands off if you're getting it managed, and just leave the letting agent to get on with it. And actually, don't go and look at the property, for God's sake, don't. Because
especially when it comes to
you've handed it over, this is personal opinion. When you've handed it over, this is my advice as an investor, because I'm no longer a landlord really anyway. I'm an investor now because you guys run it all for me. My opinion is you don't go and look at the property, because when you handed it over, it's a completely different property now than when you handed it over. You can't really expect to have the same thing as exactly the same. It's like having a rental car and having it brand new delivered, and then 4 years later think it should be exactly the same condition. But it's done like 50, 60,000 miles. It's not going to be the same condition. No. But it's amazing how many inexperienced landlords or investors don't understand that, and it becomes an emotional thing. It's quite difficult as well when there's maybe an emotional attachment to the property, because it's maybe a house you've lived in before, or it's maybe a house that a relatives had, your mum and dad had, something like that, and it becomes very, very emotive because of that, and emotional, and you have to. As a landlord, as an investor, this is from my point of view, you have to step back from that and just look at it in a commercial aspect and say, okay, you have to accept things like this will happen, but you have to deal with it when it comes, and just not get emotional. It's not easier said than done, really.
Yeah, landlords with emotional attachments to properties are the biggest struggle for us sometimes, especially when it comes to tenants leaving and they've maybe damaged things, and it maybe not even something that greatly damaged, but because it meant so much to them, they take it on such a higher level, and it's quite hard to then manage because they've got that emotional attachment, and then it leads to obviously people maybe putting forward unfair claims, and that brings me to the next bit, because unfortunately some landlords do attempt unjust and exaggerated claims against their tenants. And we have seen that and tried to explain obviously where the line is drawn between, and then it makes you argue about the grey area, like you say, Jim, about wear and tear. It is a very grey area, but there are ways and means of kind of establishing what is justified and what isn't. If you don't regularly inspect your property, there could be a few years between your visits, during which time signs of wear and tear will develop. Scuffs on walls, woodwork, and floors and are part of life. And ovens don't stay looking like new. Well, we all know that. Neither does grouting or sealants, not even in the homes of landlords. So yeah, and I mean, they're quite a few of the ones up there, Kerin, that you deal with, obviously, grouting and sealants, ovens, and of course scuffs and marks on walls and things as well.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, landlords get some, coming back to landlords going into properties, obviously sometimes when they go into it and they'll pick up on every single little thing, and I'm like, you can't do it. And especially when they go in and start doing things as well, if we've not been in, had a chance to do a sign out report yet, and it's like you've just made a mess of your claim because you've gone in and started doing stuff, and we now don't have the evidence that we would have needed to be able to support your claim for it.
Yeah, well, so in the past, and like what James says here, it's a business. Have to strip out emotion. My first buy-to-let was my previous home. So yeah, that's it's important. Yeah, definitely. And we have seen that so many times in the past, Kerin, and like you say, landlords going in before we've even had a chance to establish the state of the property and record it. And that could cause a lot of problems because you've then just invalidated, obviously, our end of check. So yeah, that's something that needs to be obviously careful of landlords jumping in front of the agent, which they're employing us to do it, and sometimes they don't allow us to do it the way it should be done, and then ultimately it falls back on us for maybe not having the claim go through.
But I think from a point of view, it's because as a landlord, you know, you're so used to being in control of everything.
Yeah.
You're so used to being in control of your environment. And when you hand it over to a letting agent, you're still got this landlord's hat on.
Yeah.
And you still want to get involved in it. And that's when some people actually, you're absolutely right. You know, the tenant moves out, they immediately want in the door, and it's like, right, this is it. And they start cleaning up, and it's like, you've just got rid of all the evidence.
Yeah.
And then they insist that, oh, you've got to make a claim. And it's like, well, how are we going to do that now? Because we've got nothing to claim against. We've got no photographs. We've got no sign-out report. We've got no justification. We can't, because again, you're going to
when it has been lived in. So when you do inspections with furniture and things in place, not every wee scuff and things is apparent until you see the property empty of all the tenants' belongings.
And they take their suite out, and then you notice the burnt iron on the carpet, and they'll put their suite over all this time.
and
oh, we like that when I got it. Well, it wasn't, because here's the photograph.
And things will look far worse if it's been there for years since you were in there for your last visit. So yeah, regular inspections are invaluable, and they are a normal. Then for us, they're a normal part of the day. Anything that might have gone unnoticed in everyday distractions of life tends to get picked up before it becomes a major problem and cause for a dispute. Now, I think the good thing about inspections, whereas you might not pick up the finer things until the tenant's left, it does allow you to pick up things that maybe tenants will sometimes report, like water ingress or maybe a ventilation problem and things. And these are things that, if they're left, could be quite a costly repair at the end for the landlord. So that is
I'm amazed at the amount of letting agents now actually don't do quarterly inspections anymore. A lot of them do 6 monthly, a lot of them even do yearly, a lot of them, some of them actually don't do anything at all.
Yeah,
it's like, you know, how on earth are you supposed to be? I mean, prevention is better than cure, ultimately, when it comes to that. So that's why there's always a need to do some sort of regular check. Now, it's not to keep an eye on the tenant, and it's not to disrupt the tenant. So, you know, it's just to make sure the property is kept in a good condition. And, you know, the tenants know a builder, they'll probably know a plumber, so they're not going to know if there's anything that they think that they should be looking at, or there's anything they think should be out of sorts. They're not going to know that. You know, they're just going to think that, well, it works. That's all I know. So what would I know? Yeah. But these regular inspections can pick up a multitude of things before they actually happen.
Yeah, and I think minimum you should be in there 6 months. We do quarterly inspections, and we do have a lot of longer standing tenancies, which are now 6 months with agreement with the landlord. But we always tell landlords and tenants, look, they're not big invasive inspections. We're not here to obviously micromanage what you're doing in the property. We just want to see the place has been looked after. There isn't any damages. There isn't any glaring things that we think, right, that's going to obviously be causing issues very soon and could be a costly repair. I mean, Kerin, you still do quite a lot of your inspections and properties and things. So how do you find them?
I think you hit the nail on the head, Jim. Just obviously prevention is key. So if you're going out, and I mean, one of the key things to look at is obviously from a safety aspect, but like the cleanliness of the property, just to make sure that it's not becoming a mess, and also like the seals as well on a bath or a shower. A lot of tenants don't really pay too much attention to them, but it's the main things that I look at when I go in, because if that seal goes, you've then got water coming in where it shouldn't be, and that's causing you water damage, and then you're trying to get it fixed as well. So just a case of going in and being like, that's going to need fixed soon. You could be saving yourself hundreds of pounds and trying to get that water damage out just from going in and doing an inspection and seeing it needs done. So, and the amount of tenants as well that don't report issues, they don't even think about them. And then you go out and you see it and it's like, oh, how long's that been like that for? And they're like, oh, just a few weeks. I'm like, right.
You get a list as long as you're out.
You come with
the property. And it's like,
Yeah.
at what point were you meant to phone me about these? Yeah. You know, it's like, we did tell you, but luckily we're here, so we can actually avoid this before it actually happens. That's probably classic, you know, to circumvent that. So that's probably why regular inspections are invaluable in that process. You know, I mean, when you come to things as well, you're absolutely right about the grout, the grout and the seals in the bath, and these are the worst things to go. I mean, you know, you're going to get wee black bits in your seals and baths and everything like that. I take it that's going to be viewed as regular wear and tear.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Seals going are just wear and tear, but just so long as you're keeping on top of them, then they don't become a big issue. It's just,
I mean, if the seal goes or the seals
freshening it up, basically. That
we would rather that obviously you tell us and we'll get it resealed, rather than leave it and just I'll not tell them, and then it ends up leaking, like you say. I mean, Kerin, we've had that before. It's been left and unreported and it causes leak, and then it just ends up being a bigger repair than what it could have been. It takes 5 minutes to reseal a bath. So
smoke alarms.
Yeah, smoke alarms.
Always check the smoke alarms, because you never know, they've been tampering with them because they've gone off at some point in time and they've decided to take them off. Yeah, decided to take them off. That was classic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the good thing about having quarterly inspections as well, because that's every 3 months you've got a record of all your smoke alarms in place, your carbon monoxide's in place, that they're all functioning. They're not obviously bleeping with a low battery, which is half the reason why some tenants take them down, rather than just tell us that they're running out of battery and replace it, or get us to replace it if need be. Although
another one is cracked sockets. You know, there's a lot of cracked sockets, just frustration. And then we've got Hoover rage.
Hoover rage hitting the radiator.
On the radiator pipes. It's like they've got Hoover, bang, 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 and the radiator has wee tiny leaks in it, where you don't actually notice it, but because it's right round the floorboards and you've got that wee space, the water just runs down the pipe and then down into the lower property, if that's the case. Even if it's on a lower level, it could actually end up causing, you know, either wet rot or dry rot. I'm not sure which one it is over time if it's left. So you have to watch out for things like that, you know, just wee tiny leaks and valves.
And sometimes that doesn't become apparent until obviously the leak's noticed, or if the boiler keeps dropping pressure, then obviously that's one of the telltale signs.
Well, in the current boilers, you're fine with that, you know, you can tell that. But in the old backs of boiler systems, they just automatically top up the systems. Yeah. You know, you've got a feeder tank, it does it automatically. So you would never know. So that's another thing you've got to watch out for.
I think keeping an eye on carpets as well is a key thing, because quite a lot of people don't know, and we've obviously learned this through experience, but if you've got like an iron burn on the carpet, you're not getting the money back for a new carpet. They'll only allow a claim for like the section that's been damaged, which obviously isn't fair, because if you've got something like that, you are having to put down a whole new carpet, but they will only allow for the damaged section to be claimed again. So that's a really important one for landlords going forward.
Which is a real frustration, because you're absolutely right. I mean, you've got a big blooming mark in the carpet, which is a burn effectively. So you can't exactly cut a bit out and put another bit in. And you gave them a brand new carpet in the first place, and the deposit scheme actually says, no, just for that wee bit, you'll have to pay for maybe £50 or something like that. My carpet was about 300 quid. So that's things that people have to watch out for when you come to deal with the deposit, the safe deposit scheme. You don't have any choice. That's the rules, and that's how they work. And it's a custodial scheme, so you're at the mercy of basically solicitors and well, dare I say, jobs worths. And jumped up people that think they've got a right and control. I'll tell you what to do, Mr. Landlord. Don't you get at me.
Yeah, I think that the deposit dispute thing, I mean, there is a lot of loopholes, and there's a lot of things that you need to know what you're doing when you're putting a claim in, or you're on a hiding to nothing. And I think a big thing is preparation as well, in the first instance. And that brings me in summary to, obviously, as a landlord, there's a lot that you need to get right, not just to minimise the opportunity of disputes, but to ensure you don't automatically lose them. There are many laws that cover lettings that to help you run your tenancies efficiently, and well-maintained properties tend to attract higher quality tenants, most of whom who love their home and will treat it as if it's their own. And that does bring us back to having a clean, presentable property with obviously functioning appliances and the heating system functioning, things that you attract a better level of tenant, and then ultimately you're going to have a better tenant who's going to look after the property, and the whole tenancy runs a lot smoother, I think, in the long run. And I'm sure you would agree with that, and that comes back to obviously attracting and putting the right tenant in place to begin with.
It's probably making sure you've got all your ducks in a row in the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, in order, this is what I've got to do here, this is what I've got to do there, this is what I've got to do there, this is what I've got to do there, this is what I've got to do there. It's systemization. You know, I mean, that's probably why you'd use a letting agent, because if you've only got one or two properties, it's like, really? Do you want to learn all that? I would rather go out and earn 50 quid an hour and pay a letting agent £2.50 a day, less than the price of a cup of coffee, to manage my property and never have anything to do with it ever again. You know, that's the reality.
There's never been a truer statement, because I mean, Kerin and I obviously have been through. I mean, Kerin, how much have you learned through training over the last few years? I mean, a lot of years, and it changes so much and so often, and we need to keep obviously up to date with it so that we know what we're talking about, and we know that we're doing things properly and advising people properly. And it's a job in itself, obviously. So to be a landlord and try and keep up with all that is difficult.
It is, yeah. Every aspect of it is changing, not just obviously deposit schemes. You've got changes in legislation, obviously even the tenancy agreements changed. So it's like you have to, unless you're prepared to be paying attention to that all the time, it's easier just to have an agency that know what they're doing and are keeping up to date with that. It's their job to do it. So yeah.
And even like all the changes with coronavirus now, and obviously notice periods and things as well. I mean, we had to make sure we were all up to date with that, and obviously operating things properly. And a lot of landlords come to me with a wee bit clueless, like, where do I stand here? What am I doing? Yeah, so you need to be in the know, and I think in an industry where things are ever changing, you need to make sure you're doing things correctly. So yeah, any final thoughts, Kerin, to add?
Definitely best piece of advice is make sure you have a good inventory. A lot of landlords think they can do their own, and it's just like a spreadsheet with, this is what's in this room, or this is good. I'm like, no, that's not going to work. You definitely need an inventory that's got pictures that are dated, time-stamped, and obviously descriptions as well to go along with it. So best piece of advice is our inventory is worth the money. So definitely best thing to have.
What about a walkthrough video? Can you get away with that?
Yeah, I think they would accept that, but you would need to then email it to the tenant, and the tenant would need to respond to the email and say they accept it. You need to have acceptance for the tenant. I think. But
then even that, you're probably on a sticky wicket.
You know, maybe because
video.
It's open for
I'm just trying to think of the things that a self-managed landlord could actually do to circumvent to do it themselves. But again, I'll probably just come back to saying that, you know, if there's only one or two properties you've got, you're probably just better getting a letting agent doing it.
Yeah.
You know, with hindsight's the greatest thing. You know, I noticed James had said red wine. That's a big one. That happens quite a bit.
Hi, Julie.
Hi, Julie. So I think it's actually just, in hindsight, what I've learned is, like, you know, you better just stick to your knitting and stick at what you do well, and let the other people do their job even better than what you would do, and don't try to reinvent the wheel. I know in the beginning as a landlord it's difficult because you think every penny's a prisoner, but in the long run, in the medium to long run, it's probably a better option, because I think peace of mind's more than anything. I've always said, for God's sake, being a landlord is no for the faint-hearted at all. Yeah. It's just it's the first thing I say to everybody. Oh, I want to be a landlord. Well, I'll tell you what, you'll be a social worker if that's the case, because that's what I was for the first.
Like that some days.
That's what I was for the first 10 years. Or
definitely eye-opening.
Yeah, and it's great, and I'm that type of person. I want to help everybody, but the difficulty is, where do you stop when somebody starts to take a loan of you? And that's difficult for me to do that, and it's difficult for me to. Well, everybody else tells me that, but why are you doing that? And I'm still saying no, but I'm still trying to help. So it is the case that it's quite difficult to actually stop people taking a loan of you as a landlord. Yeah. So I think it is important to realise that if you want to be a landlord, it's not for the faint-hearted. If you want to be an investor, that means that you've got a managed agent doing it. And then you've really got a hands-off approach to this, and somebody else is looking after your investment. Then that's probably your best course of action. If you're no gun-ho and you're no straight in there, and you're no into all your roller coaster ups and downs, because that's really effectively what it is. That's why you would use a letting agent.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and the key, obviously, deposit disputes. To win the deposit dispute, you have to have the right preparation in the first instance, as you say, Kerin. Inventories, condition reports, do your due diligence, and obviously recording things properly at the beginning and the end, and knowing your stuff and knowing where you stand and what's a rightful and justified claim, and all of that hand in hand is quite a lot to try and deal with if you're just a landlord trying to deal with property. So I think, yeah, like Jim says, just to reiterate, get the professionals to do it, basically. So, and on that note, I'm going to wrap things up. So thanks very much for coming on and chatting tonight. That was good.
You're welcome.
It's an interesting topic.
My third programme today. Oh, to be so popular.
It is a really interesting topic, and I know obviously landlords and things we could talk about all day. Thanks to everybody that's left comments. If anybody else obviously watching it on the rerun, put in the comments or message us direct. Obviously, we deal with deposit disputes and have done for a long time. So any questions, we're happy to help and give advice. And that's us. So I'm going to wrap up there. So thanks, guys. Okay, right.
Thank you very much for your time. See you later. Bye-bye for now, everybody.
Night, everybody.